Alrighty. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Kara-Leah. Welcome to a special edition of Conversations with Kara-Leah, which is a recap. It is a contemplation, it is a reflection. About 4 weeks ago, I started a new series on Conversations with Kara-Leah where I wanted to examine what actually happened at the occupation at Parliament here in New Zealand that ran from February 7th to March 2nd. In that time, I've interviewed 4 people: Matu Te Huki, musician and facilitator; Sita Pati Das, Hari Krishna; Alistair Boyce, owner of the Backbencher Pub; and Rachel Barwell, who is a literacy expert and involved in climate change, amongst other things. She's involved in leadership. Okay, so really interesting to do those 4 interviews. They're like an hour long each. I recognize it's quite a lot of time. And my original intention going in was to better understand the disjunct that I was feeling between what I was seeing in the media and what I was hearing from my friends on the ground who were there at the protest. And this was an interesting thing for me because when COVID began and then vaccination came in and then mandates came in, I tend towards not knowing, sitting in the space of not knowing, neither. And I tend towards curiosity. And I don't like to say that anything is true unless I've researched it really well myself and understand all the different sources of where stuff is coming from. And so I found myself often no longer aligned with what some of my friends or community were believing or thinking when it came to COVID, how serious it was, how serious it wasn't, et cetera, to the vaccinations and to even the mandates to a degree. And that was an unusual place to be, because all of a sudden it's like, whoa, I'm not believing what everyone else is believing. What's going on? Am I missing something? So I really did a lot of serious inquiry to feel into it, but I still just didn't align with the things that were being said. So part of when the protest started happening, I was really intrigued to notice, right? So I've got lots of friends down there from the festival scene in particular who are protesting against mandates. And, I can see the case for mandates on certain levels. I can see the political case and the health case. I can see how they could have been handled better. I can see the impact they're having on people. I can see it all. And what I noticed was I was completely sucked into the protest while it was running. Like those 2 or 3 weeks, I hardly got any work done. I was watching the lives, I was reading the articles, I was feeling into it, and then I started writing articles myself about what was happening. And it was like voracious. I was writing 3 or 4 articles a week. So something was going on. And out of that arose the Conversations with Kara-Leah series. Now that I'm pausing to reflect, what's coming up for me is a sense that I identified with the protesters because a lot of them were my friends. Even though I did not believe in the various ideas about New World Orders, et cetera, and to tell the truth, I am in a problem with vaccination. Like whatever, it probably works, has an impact, don't even want to go into it, but I'm agnostic, like I'm kind of neutral. And I chose to get vaccinated because it seemed to me like cost benefit analysis, path of least resistance, worst case scenario, what, I die in 5 years' time? So it's been interesting. It's been so interesting. But my energy was going in that direction. So I decided, okay, let's interview people and find out what was it like on the ground, what was happening on the ground. And I really wanted to give people, I wanted to listen to people, I wanted to see people, I wanted people to be seen and heard, and I wanted to offer a compassionate listening space, okay, which is what I did. However, in doing that, what also kind of came in and flowed with it is that I wasn't challenging the beliefs that people were holding. And when I was doing the interview, the story I was telling myself was, that wasn't a problem per se, because I wasn't there to challenge the beliefs. I wasn't there to talk about misinformation and disinformation. Why I was there was to listen to people heart to heart and to feel into their human experience of what it was like on the ground, what drew them there, et cetera, et cetera. Since doing those first few interviews in particular, I've had people reach out to me with concerns that I am platforming misinformation and disinformation, and I hadn't even considered that. And they're like, well, if you're not challenging what they're saying, then, you're complicit and you're agreeing with it. I'm like, well, that's an interesting thing to reflect on. So I've been reflecting on that. And what I realized in all of this reflection of the thing was that one of the reasons I was drawn into the protest, and one of the reasons that I really wanted to hold space for people who were there so they could be seen and heard and held in love and compassion, was a projection of my own trauma. Because that's how I like to be treated, and how I wasn't necessarily treated in childhood or after childhood by family. And something about that situation at protest, because my friends were involved, there was kind of like family as such, and it triggered shit in me. And I was like, oh shit, has the whole conversations with Kara-Leah been a trauma response? And I started to feel into that. And then last week I went to do the next interview in the series, and what I noticed was, the internet kept cutting out. It was freaking shocking, and we ended up having to abort the interview. But what I also noticed was that energetically, I was no longer super, I don't know how to describe this. It was like I wasn't in the room anymore. It's like when I was talking to the person, the same kind of energetic, like, whoa, got to do this thing, was just gone. It had dissipated. And after we aborted the interview, I was reflecting on it. I'm like, oh, my heart's not in this anymore. Whatever the purpose was of this series has come to completion for me. And if I continue on doing it, I'm just doing it because why? Right. And this is an interesting thing as a creative to feel into, because, in essence, I'm my own boss. When I say I'm going to do a series, I can do it for 4 interviews, I can do 40 interviews, whatever. And as a creative, what I recognize is that where creative energy goes, ultimately, all of my creative stuff that I've ever created is really coming out of me exploring and resolving my own trauma, my own conditioning, so that I can evolve as a person, and so my life can evolve. And that's the nature of creativity for me. And that creativity comes through what appears to be business in some ways, but like, I don't make any money doing conversations with Kara-Leah. It takes a shit ton of time and energy. It's just a creative project. And so reflecting on all of this, I was like, shit, it was a trauma response from me. And one of the things I've really been feeling into is the way in which anti-vaccination is quite likely or potentially a trauma response. And there's research coming out about this right now. There's a particular study that was done down in Dunedin, one of those long form studies where they started studying people in like 1971, 1972, and then they touch base again as they go through, and they get these screeds of data, which they can then use to better understand humans. And what they're starting to notice is correlation, or is it causation? Maybe correlation. Between adverse childhood experiences, aka trauma, particularly ones related to authority, right, trust, abuse, etc., and the stances that people then take later on in life with regards to, say, vaccines. More adverse childhood trauma potentially leads to less trust of authority, etc., and potentially anti-vaccine views. And I was like, oh, let's just get interesting, What I realized, though, is that it felt like, for me, the purpose of conversations with Kara-Leah had come to fruition. And then I was like, well, but I said, do I need to? And I was like, nah, fucking, it's my party. I get to define it. I'm going to come on and do this and share what's been coming up for me and what I've realized, and to really own the stuff that's unfolded. So the second piece that I want to own is that, like, I studied journalism in my early 20s, and I realized pretty quickly that because of abuse trauma in childhood, I had a really strong people-pleasing pattern running. And this was particularly related to men, particularly related to authority. And what it meant was that I would become a doormat and acquiesce. Basically, I wouldn't challenge my interview subjects. And in fact, when I first started doing journalism, I remember I had to interview this guy who was like, he was in his 40s. He was like super powerful within the town, et cetera, et cetera. And I was so scared of calling this guy to interview them. I was literally in tears. I was like in tears, and I'm watching myself. I'm like, what the fuck is wrong with me? Just a fucking interview. Call the guy. And I had to deal with the tears first. So that people pleasing pattern, which is often, not always, but often in response to abuse, was really strong in certain ways. And so I noticed, particularly in those first two interviews, Matthew and I go way back, and I was afraid to challenge him. I was afraid to bring things up. I was afraid. And that didn't necessarily serve the interview in a meaningful way, not for Matthew and not for me and not for the body of material that we were examining. So when I realized that, I was like, oh, shit, that conditioning is preventing me from being the best interviewer that I could be. So then I started to feel into that as well. And this is the kind of self-reflection that I'm constantly doing within my work, within my life, in order to identify, be aware of these patterns, this conditioning, and then dissolve it and not let it run the show, right? Because when we let trauma run the show, we're not necessarily able to take in all the data points and assess things clearly or rationally, because the trauma gets in the way, right? And so I was like, if I'm committed to doing this work around trauma resolution and speaking to it, I need to name the fact of how it showed up for me on this particular webinar series. And I reckon there's more in this. I reckon there's a whole lot more in this, but I'm not the person to investigate it. And the reason is that I've realized that what I want to focus on, like I've spent a lot of time over the last 10, 15, 20 years really focusing on resolving trauma. It's like, took you that long? Well, yeah, it fucking did. And one of the reasons, I ended up in a psych ward when I was in 2004, when I was 29, and holy shit, like that rocked me to my absolute core. The fear that there was something so fundamentally wrong with me that my brain could go into psychosis, and it could happen at any time. Like that, to come back from that was a huge, huge thing. And I've totally come back from that now. And I have no fear whatsoever of that ever happening again because of the work that I've done. However, what's also becoming really clear to me now is that I don't want to be like responding to trauma, diving into trauma. I'm done. What I want to focus on, what I'm really excited about, what I think is important, is creation. It's the more beautiful world that we all know is possible, right? And this is where I want to put my energy, into creating the more beautiful world, into looking at things like the housing crisis or mental health crisis or suicide crisis, all these different things that are going on, and asking the question of, how can we solve that? Who's doing great work in that already? Who's already shifting things? What's actually going on out there? Who would I be really excited about having a conversation with? Because what they're bringing through on the creative level is what we need as a society to drastically reshape us ourselves. Because extinction is a thing, peeps. Like climate change, climate apocalypse. We have no idea what is going to happen, and we have no idea how fast it's going to happen. And when I look at the way that the world is attempting to solve climate change, what I see is denial, total fucking denial, and absolute attachment to the fundamental worldview, which is giving us the problem in the first place. And unless we're willing to look at that worldview and dissolve that worldview and take on another worldview, I reckon we're fucked, right? And there's a couple of ways to look at that. Well, we're fucked, so let's just enjoy the fuck out of the world for the next little while. Going to be doing that anyway. And the other way to look at it is, how could we shift things really deep, really fast, in a way that means that other species don't go extinct, human beings don't go extinct. The earth will be fine, quite likely, right? Life itself will be fine, life will keep on going, but human beings, we're fucking ourselves up because we don't give a shit. Basically, we rape and pillage the earth. You know, we strip out the resources for what? For money, status, power, and gain. And we won't even cop to it. We won't even fucking admit it. And so this is where I'm going to start sending my energy on Conversations with Kara-Leah, is looking at creation. Who's doing amazing work that I want to talk to? Who do I want to elevate? Who do I want to highlight and bring out there, right? And show. Okay, I'm just going to feel into if there's anything else to say on this. I feel that those 4 interviews I did provide value because they show quite clearly, I feel, particularly the last one with Rachel. Like, I really loved what Rachel had to say. If you haven't watched that one, watch that one. Because I do think I have genuine concerns about the way that things were handled when it came to the protests, when it came to the mandates, even when it came to the vaccine rollout, you know, and that's natural. There's often a better way we can do things, right? I don't think there's some overarching conspiracy with lizard people and this and that. I really don't. And you know what? Even if I did think that was going on, let me just feel into this. This is a really important piece. Okay, this is a quote. I can't remember the guy's name. He's an Australian musician and author, and he was on a Dane Thomas podcast I watched yesterday. I will drop his name down below. But he said, the moment that you believe that Bill Gates is attempting to engineer depopulation of the world, the moment that you start to believe in that, you short circuit your creativity, right? And he's like, neither, just hold lightly. And I'm like, yes, that's it. Because we have no fucking idea if that's what Bill Gates is up to. And honestly, really, like, as Dane said on that particular podcast, you know, Bill Gates is a problem solver. He is seeing a problem on this world. And one of the problems on this world is population. And there's other problems like, you know, not clean water and people dying from, or children especially dying from diseases that you can easily deal to, often with a vaccine, right? He's a problem solver and he's going about it in a very logical, rational way, but doing the thing, right? Now, there are other ways to operate when it comes to problem solving. And there is the way of like tuning into the energy flow and allowing that to lead. And this is what I was doing with the Conversations with Kara-Leah and everything that led up. Oh my goodness, the energy was just flowing in that direction so strongly. And I was just going with it, going, what is this about? Where is this leading? I don't know. I'm just gonna follow it. And now the energy's moved in another direction, which is around the recognition that there's so many of my friends, there's so many people out there that are really focused on being anti, and on protesting and not liking the mainstream government and mainstream media, not liking the government and I'm just like, oh my God, guys, when you do that, when you position yourself in relationship to a thing you don't like, you've given all your power away to the thing you don't like. What would happen if you were to take all of that energy that's going towards the protesting or the not liking or the whatever, take all of that energy and instead ask yourself the question, how can I contribute to society? How can I generate things that are really supportive and amazing? And I get that some of what's happening in those spaces is that. It's probably too big a rabbit hole for me to go on and talk to it, but fuck protest, shift to creation. What do you want to create? 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 That's what I'm doing. So I'm shifting focus now on Conversations with Kara-Leah. Thanks for coming for the ride on those 4 interviews. I'm going to take a bit of a pause, moving house this week, and just see what comes up for next week. But I'm going to keep following the energy, and I'm going to really work from intentionality. So when I work from intentionality, one of the things I'm doing is just getting really clear on what's the overarching intention for this, right? And then I let the energy lead in that direction. So that's my somewhat random and somewhat messy reflections on Conversations with Kara-Leah. I know I'm aboard. I feel like I'm aborting the mission halfway through in some ways, but I've been sitting with it and it just feels like the thing to do. And I can feel the energy in me right now. It's just like, yeah, this is clear. This is just clearing the slate, clear the slate. No more operating from trauma, operating from creation. Take a moment just to sit in that energy, shall we? The energy of creation. If you could create anything that you liked for the benefit of yourself and your family and your society, for the benefit of all beings, if you could create anything you like for the benefit of all beings, what would it be? My name's Kara-Leah. This is Conversations with Kara-Leah. This is a recap of the latest series, which is now coming to a conclusion. I'll be back with more people down the line, and I hope to see you there.